CDTA. There we go.
Tony Fassel, Port of Albany and Rensselaer.
Andrew Kreshik, City of Troy.
Mark Castiglione with the Regional Planning Commission.
John Scaville, Town of Clifton Park.
Mike Valentine, Saratoga County.
Sandy Mislowitz, Capital District Transportation Committee, Executive Director.
Liz Cormos, Village of Folsom Small.
Nick Grenier, Village of Manans.
Teresa LaSalle, CDTC staff.
Carrie Ward, CDTC staff.
Good morning, Andrew Tracy, CDTC.
Jacob Dean, CDTC.
All right, I guess our next point of business, visitor issues. No visitors today, right?
There are no visitor issues that I'm aware of.
I see Steve on the screen there. I don't know if formally.
Yes.
Transfer.
So Steve Iacchetta is under the weather today. He is listening in. Thank you, Steve, for listening in and having the energy to do that. Steve Feeney is obviously going to be chairing the meeting today.
Good. All right, administration, previous meeting minutes, July 7th. Everybody had a chance to review those. I take it. Michael, any comments?
I gave mine to Sandy.
Yep, we have a few editorial comments that don't substantively change the spirit of the minutes, so we'll make those changes.
Anybody else? Can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of July 7th? Moved by Michael. Do we have a second? Second, Ross? All right, all those in favor? Aye?
Ross doesn't know I changed all his verbiage.
Okay.
Now.
We'll figure it out.
So,
All right.
Thanks, the edits.
All right. So Sandy, we'll get right to it. We have a presentation today, CD Smith, NISDOT Region 1. We got Regional Bridge Program.
Right.
What's
So
conducting that?
we met with NISDOT staff a couple of weeks ago about bridge conditions in the region. And we thought this was a good time to kind of brief this committee on the state of bridge conditions, both on the locally owned bridge system as well as the state-owned bridge system. So we're actually going to have a two-part presentation today. Eric Leclerc from CDM Smith is going to share with us the work that's been done on the local bridge study and the findings of that effort. And then NISDOT Region 1, Greg Wixler, will present on sort of the state picture. So Eric is doing this virtually with us. Eric, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am here, and good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sandy. Are you hearing me okay?
We are. I think you can share your screen at any time.
Excellent, I'll start that now. All right, and please let me know if that's coming through okay.
It is.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sandy, and to the full committee for giving us the opportunity to present our findings for the CDTC's locally owned bridge preservation candidates, treatments and cost study, this 2020 update. So just a quick outline, so that we'll give an overview of the study itself. We'll talk a little bit about bridge condition rating system changes that occurred since the last study, which was in 2015. We'll talk about our condition assessment and work strategies, a little bit about the repair program schedule, some in-depth assessments that we conducted at various locations, some condition rating updates, and projected repair costs, probably maybe of most interest to the folks in the room. And lastly, just a wrap-up summary. All right, so again, just our study objectives was to identify the candidates for bridge preservation treatment. We wanted to evaluate and the extent of the repairs that were needed for those locally owned bridges throughout the CDTC's planning area. And particularly want to take a look at some of the at-risk bridges, and I'll explain what those at-risk bridges mean, what that means a little bit further on. And we wanted to provide some program schedule recommendations for future planning in getting projects into your overall program for funding. And then lastly, wanted to summarize that bridge data so that it could be used by CDTC in your internal planning efforts, but also by the local bridge owners who were part of the committee overseeing this study. So overall, we assessed a total of 377 locally owned bridges. That's a slight change from the 2015 study. The changes being there are some bridges that were either closed or changed ownership. Weren't part of the study this time around. And again, just a follow on to our 2015 study, looking at the same process. So during, over the time between the 2015 and the 2020 study, New York State DOT made a transition away from their historic New York State rating system and moved to the AASHTO element rating system. The study in 2015 was based on DOT's rating scale of 7 to 1, with 7 being essentially new condition element, down to 1 being a failed condition element. And so this is different than from the AASHTO element system, which uses a different condition states from CS1 to CS4. Hopefully you can see the graphic on the side of the screen there. It's not covered by my window here, but the kind of relating the condition state system to the older system, a CS1 in AASHTO element is considered new or very new, good condition, all the way down to CS4, which is the equivalent of a 2 or 1 rating in the old DOT system, and indicates components that are in very severe condition or potentially failed. So in the old system, the DOT components were often, or some of the components were based on a worst of rating, which tend to skew the data a little bit as far as, you're looking at an overall system. For example, a primary member of a bridge is composed of all the girders of the bridge, whereas AASHTO element is now based on each individual foot of girder for the bridge. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the entire quantity of the bridge for each element is now assessed through this rating system, which gives you much more accuracy, gives you much more bridge data to evaluate. So again, the AASHTO system focuses on the bridge elements, broken down all the way from the substructure, the footings, the stem, the primary load carrying members, the safety elements of the railing, sidewalk, and the deck. And it also provides, as I mentioned, much more accurate data for asset management purposes. So throughout this process, our assessments were based on the 2019 and 2020 New York State DOT bridge inspection data that comes through their biennial inspection program. We also use DOT's bridge inventory data to confirm structural details of each of the bridges we looked at. And we use that information to identify the different types of repairs that would be needed to address the condition ratings at each structure. And then lastly, we assigned a repair time frame for the program schedule. And as you can see, this graphic here is just a comparison of computed condition rating from 2015 to 2020. This is based on the DOT's computed condition rating that is developed through the BETIS or EAM program, which correlates all the data together for all the bridges. So again, as we went through our assessment and identified work strategies, we put together a strategy for all the local bridges and categorized them into these different types of work strategies, anywhere from full replacement to a major rehabilitation. That would be something like a deck replacement or superstructure replacement. A minor rehabilitation would be something more along the lines of substructure repairs or isolated repairs to the deck or railing. Element specific repair is identifying and addressing, as it notes, element specific, in particular, addressing joints, addressing railing repairs, addressing spot repairs throughout the bridge. And then lastly, preventative maintenance actions that can be taken to slow the deterioration over time. So one of the things to note as the findings of our study is there's a substantial increase in minor rehabilitation and element-specific repairs from the 2015 study as compared with the 2020 study. And what we found was this is due mainly to the nature of the element-specific ratings. In the past, as I noted, an element that was a worst of rating, like the primary member, which encompasses, say, the girders of the bridge. In the past, you'd have a single numeric rating for that entire system. An AASHTO element now takes all 5 of those girders for a 100-foot-long bridge and creates 500 feet of girder to be assessed and quantified for condition. The new method of assigning and conditions to the bridges allows a much more detailed look and also points out very specific locations and quantities, which has come through this study as far as the additional work that's needed to address those that wasn't necessarily seen in the worst of ratings in the past. So this combined data that we assembled into the data worksheet, which I won't show necessarily here today, but will be available once the study is complete. But it allows a really clear, much more clear, or can be used to get a much more clear picture of the bridge health of structures overall. And here you can see just a summary of the different types of treatments that we identified throughout the process for each of the different bridge owners that are part of the bridge committee for CDTC. Again, condition assessment and work strategies. So we did review the at-risk bridges, and the at-risk bridges are considered structures that need an immediate repair or replacement. They may have condition flags as depicted here, either a yellow structural flag or a red structural flag. They might be precast concrete elements that have a main load carrying member with a condition state rating of 3 or 4. They might be load posted, and they're of particular interest because they may be at imminent risk of capacity reduction, in other words, becoming load posted, or potentially even closure. And one thing to note about this graphic here on the right with the flags is, the safety flags have dropped down to almost nothing since the 2015 study. That reflects a change in policy for DOT, whereby safety flags are no longer issued unless they require prompt interim action. And those elements that are safety related are more handled as maintenance activities. So the repair program schedule. So once we had assigned the recommended repair strategies for each structure, we identified the recommended timing for the repairs as well. We categorized them similar to the 2015 study as immediate, 2-year, 5-year, or 10-year time frame. And the way we addressed those and categorized them was that anything with a CS3 or 4 rating, we moved towards a 2-year repair cycle, and fair condition or non-structural problems were identified as a 5-year programming schedule, with elements in good condition being on a 10-year plus schedule. So again, some of the takeaways here, there is an increase in the 5 to 10-year programming. And again, that's directly attributable to that element-specific assessment. Now we're able to see more specifically the different elements of the bridge which are in poor condition and that would benefit from a preservation strategy to address those conditions before they begin to affect the entire system overall. So in-depth assessments. So after we conducted our initial review to identify candidates for in-depth assessment, we identified a pool of bridges for suggestion to each bridge owner in the bridge committee, as that we could take a more in-depth look at those structures. We assessed up to 6 bridges for each of the owners. A total of 14 assessments, in-depth assessments were conducted. Our staff made field visits to review the conditions at the site. We we took a look at all the conditions at the site, including utilities, potential right-of-way issues, adjacent driveways, other impactful issues that may change our perspective on how the bridge should be addressed in addressing its condition or future projects for it. And then ultimately, we developed a conceptual cost estimate for those in-depth assessments. After we had conducted our assessment of all the bridges, we were asked by CDTC to develop an updated calculator for determining computed condition rating to help them in the planning of future projects. The idea being here, it allows the committee staff to really take a look, and once repairs are suggested, it allows projecting what the improvements would be to the bridge and improving those ratings based on the work that could be done. So projected repair cost. So based on our assessment of the in-depth bridges, again, it's a very small sample size, but we came up with an average cost by work strategy, as noted here. A replacement being in the order of $2 million, a major rehab being in the order of $1 million, a minor rehab about $500,000, and an element specific in the order of $200,000. So based on these, and again, this is based on a small sample size. We did not look at individual bridges for this, but the total repair replacement cost for the entire bridge inventory of local bridges is approximately $168 million. And let me break that down a little bit more finely for you. So the preservation cost, which would be bridges where you'd have a major rehab, minor rehab, or element specific, the total cost for that work based on these numbers is estimated about $110 million. That compares relatively closely with the 2015 preservation cost estimate from our report at that time, which was $88.5 million. The difference being in part attributable to some deteriorating conditions of the bridges themselves, certainly, but also the change in focus and the availability of more data now for the individual elements of the bridges. And if you're wondering the difference between the 168 and the 110, that 58 million is associated with replacement costs. So there's about 29 bridges through our assessment that we determined thought the best course of action would be a full replacement, and the total cost of that work would be about $58 million. So those were the findings as far as, again, I do want to make sure I caution you, this is based on a small sample size. It's based on the cost we worked up for those in-depth assessments, but it gives you an overall picture of the magnitude of work and how things have progressed from 2015. So again, just in summary, we evaluated the 377 locally owned bridges, developed their preservation work strategies for all bridges with bridge elements that were rated CS3 or less. We developed our recommended program schedule, conducted the in-depth assessments for a select number of bridges for several owners, developed that updated computed condition rating calculator, and lastly, did assemble a comprehensive searchable bridge data worksheet that'll be available to CDTC staff for future planning, and also to the bridge owners as well in developing their own capital plans. So with that, Sandy, that's all I had for my study. I don't know if there's any brief questions or if we want to move right to the next topic.
Thank you, Eric. I did want to acknowledge Andrew Tracy was our project manager. He will be getting more involved with looking at the bridge program and working with DOT staff on infrastructure conditions moving forward. So just wanted to say that, but any initial questions for Eric? Move on.
With the ratings that are established here and the whole process was funneled down to some last couple of points there. Will this be used as a criterion basis in tip project review, application review?
So and Andrew, feel free to chime in on that. But it is an element of how we evaluate the bridges for our TIP process, and this data feeds into the benefit cost ratio. Do you want to explain a little more detail?
For the quantitative portion of the bridge scores for the TIP evaluation, bridge condition is one of the biggest factors. So if you're repairing a bridge and there's an expected to be a very large improvement in bridge condition, then you'll get a higher benefit from that project. So bridge condition is one of the biggest factors in the quantitative portion.
Would a bridge listed in 2 years versus 10 years get a more favorable review?
Not for the quantitative portion. I think that we just look at the total benefit in today's dollars of doing that, of doing the repair. So I don't think it matters if you're proposing for it to be repaired immediately or in the out years.
Would the presentation today be available? Because I'd like to share it with our DPW so they can start.
Eric, would you be willing to share your slides with the planning committee?
Sure, absolutely, Andrew. I'll send that slide deck over to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mike, we can also share the full report. It's almost ready. The draft final report is prepared.
Why didn't you even ask for that? Because Eric had said in this thing, he goes, when it's done. So
Okay, right. It should be done mid-August is when Eric is targeting the final report.
no, I was just thinking about even providing this to the ones who will be putting TIP applications together.
Okay.
Or Bridge New York.
I was just wondering if the, 377 covered all the bridges, if that data, is available, to see, where your bridges for
Sure.
municipalities that aren't part of the committee. I mean, they got the detailed evaluation, but even just the first evaluation would be useful for a local.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, so Eric prepared a final report. We also have a workbook. It's in Microsoft Excel workbook with many tabs in it detailing the bridge conditions summarized in various ways. So that can be made available as well if you'd like to look up. The workbook also has a way of filtering by municipality, so you can look up just your municipality if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
useful to put on a readily available site for municipalities to look
Yep.
at.
I'll coordinate with Andrew on what the best approach is, and we'll let all the municipalities know of its availability.
Right. We might not publish that because it has all of the bridge data, but we can certainly share that with you. That should be available on the same timeframe, mid-August, as the final report.
Okay. Last question, Adam?
Yeah, I'm not sure how quite to phrase this, but moving to the more fine-grained element, condition rating, it strikes me that like if you have a foot of an element that's in poor condition, that whole element may still need to be replaced as part of the project, right? So I guess I'm kind of wondering how moving to that system affects the cost estimates and like, I guess that's part of what what Eric presented on. Because doing a project, you're not, that specific element may require much more work on the bridge. Does that?
I think Andrew, you might want to.
So for something like a bridge deck, you might be able to do a partial repair of only the portion of the bridge deck that was found to be in very poor condition. But you're right, if a steel beam has even just a small portion with cross-sectional loss, then you'd want to repair the whole beam. Maybe Eric can speak a bit more to that, but the way the condition score works is it's a weighted average of all the all the elements on the bridge. It's a weighted average of how much is in good condition versus fair or poor condition. Eric, was there anything more you'd like to speak to that question?
Yeah, Andrew, I think you covered it pretty well there, but to the questioner's point, when we did our assessment, you're right. When there's depending on the element, you may have to do additional work beyond just addressing that single 1 foot of the element. And so as we made our assessment, we took that into account and tried to tailor the type of rehabilitation or work strategy, preservation work strategy that was needed to that. So even though it is finer grained, it did impact and was taken into account with the work strategies that realistically in some instances you can't just address that 1 foot. You may have to replace the whole element, and that was taken into account in our repair strategies.
Eric, Ross Farrell from CDTA. Another, I guess, nuanced question, but how much in the ratings, how much is actual usage volumes taken into account? On the slide, I think it was slide 12, there's a big chunk of, I think it was Rensselaer County had, severe bright red bridges that needed something to happen to them. But how do we know of those bridges anywhere? Which ones are absolutely critical to stay open, versus which ones are just an inconvenience if they're closed? And obviously, that's a relative term because it's inconvenient to one resident that's their lives, but if it's inconvenient to thousands of people per day, that's another thing. So how's volumes and potential detours, how's that factored into everything?
Well, thank you for the question, Ross. So the bridge data worksheet does include information on average daily traffic, which is available through DOT's bridge inventory data as well. So that's essentially a searchable feature. It's part of the worksheet. So if for instance, anyone viewing the data, if they wanted to look at it, in particular those bridges that might be prioritized, you could use that as a search feature within that data worksheet and filter it down. And again, if there needs to be a focus, or if based on the particular grant funding that's available, if it has to be focused towards high volume roads, or if there's a program that supports lower volume roads, that could be searched through that data worksheet and highlight. It would allow you to highlight those particular bridges and projects that would fall into those categories.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'll add, for the purpose of the tip evaluation, bridge volume and detour length as well, the proximity to parallel bridges, those are factored into the quantitative score for each bridge. But for the purpose of this study, just looking at which repairs are recommended for each type of bridge, volume wasn't considered, only the condition of the bridge.
That's right. Thank you.
Are we gonna have any analysis, and I know this was last time through, it was a big joke, like rural versus urban. Is that gonna be clarified in any way, other than the volume question that was just brought up? I mean, that's a way to look at it, but you could still have a high volume in the rural area.
Right, there's certainly different ways we can look at bridges. I'm assuming you're talking in the context of the tip update.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to discuss that a little later in the meeting, so hold that line of thinking.
Okay. I think you're sort of talking two different elements. I mean, these are the technical data looked at the structure versus the programming piece of it, which brings into context the role that bridge plays in the larger network. I think they're sort of two separate discussions, and I think it'll get into some of Greg's conversation as well.
Yeah. And I'm only asking in terms of what discussion came out of last time through, okay? And try to avoid.
Yep, understood. So in the interest of time, I thank you, Eric. If we could move to, we can move to Greg's presentation. Oh, I think that's everything. Yep, looks like it. Okay, Greg, I'll pass this over to you. Yep.
Test my eyesight here.
Yeah, I know. We will, we just learned a lesson. We'll have a laptop up this end of the table for us who can't see very far.
All right.
Wow.
You can also zoom in. I have
He's
to-
pretty
He's a
good.
dumb guy.
Knock on wood, no classes yet. Morning, everybody. So I'm going to try and do a very quick DOT overview. Some of it I'm going to focus on the CDTC area. Some of it I'm going to give a regional perspective. All right, where'd my mouse go?
Not-
There we go.
Okay, let's try how you're angling the
Yeah.
mouse.
So, I mean, here's the synopsis. I just heard about the local bridges. There's 498 state-owned bridges in the CDTC area. You just heard about the 377 locally owned. And then there's 213 bridges owned by others, I'll call them agencies, the Thruway Authority, railroads, I think there's a couple parks. Region-wide, we have 826 state-owned bridges. In the, let's say, medium-term history, we've been bumping along at about 3 replacements a year, which equates to a 275-year replacement cycle. So, I'm just gonna paint an overall network picture here.
Bridge.
It's a good bridge.
Roman aqueduct.
So here's a snapshot of the 25-year period, 50 to 75 years ago, which really, as you can see, represents the number of bridges built each year from 1945 to 1970, which is your interstate building era. But we also built a lot more than just interstate bridges in that time period. Let's overlay the, oops, I want to back up one. The number of bridges that we've built in the past 25 years to present. So this is 1997 to now. These are the number of bridges we're replacing in blue. And you can kind of see there's a one spike in 2016, which represents what was the CBO initiative at the time, the Critical Bridges Over Water. We got some federal aid after the hurricanes Irene and Lee to get after water critical bridges over water. That's the name of the program, but to improve the resiliency of the bridges that were damaged in that storm. But otherwise, now I'm going to overlay the 5-year running average of our bridge replacements. And that line there represents the number of bridges we'd have to replace per year to hit a 75-year cycle, which bridges were historically designed for a 50-year life, but we're stretching them to 75 through our preservation efforts. So that's the picture of when things were built and such. So how are we faring with that? On the NISDOT bridge status in the CDTC area, we have of the 498 bridges, 47 are structurally deficient currently. Of those, only 5 of them are load posted, and currently none are closed. So we're faring okay with this situation. I did do a quick local poll, even though I knew you guys were going to hear about it more thoroughly. Similarly, there's, of the 377, 75 are structurally deficient by the most recent report I saw. And here's the situation, 22 are load posted and 13 of those are closed. Here's another metric we watch. We watch the flag count each year. And what's interesting here is there's a big wave of flags back in 2013. And then our flag count has dropped off significantly, which is good. So by this metric, we're faring okay right now. But what's interesting is the Patroon Island Bridge, prior to that project, was getting a lot of flags, numerous flags per year, as shown by this wave. And when that bridge project went out and the rehab was complete, that took care of a major chunk of our regional flags on the state side. So that's that metric. The local bridge flags, in the recent years, you can see we have a trend up in red flags, which, is a concern. I wouldn't say it's dire yet, but it definitely shows a trend that, it's the trend. I don't know what happened in that same time period, about 8 years ago, why the flags dropped off. I didn't delve into that too much, but
It's assuming a constant inspection rate.
it is. I mean, every bridge is inspected every 2 years. So I haven't delved in to see what the drop off was, but the more recent trend is back increasing again. So that's that data point. Another interesting one is in the regional perspective. Well, I mean,
does it depend on the inspector? I mean, how?
Well, there's some
subjective-
difference. I mean, most of the DOT ones are done in-house. And what's, not so much on the red flags, but on what a safety flag may be, there is some subjectiveness to it. I would tend to say that the consultant partners may be a little more conservative because that's what they're getting paid for than our inspectors may be. But I mean, the criteria is pretty well established.
so another interesting one that drives some of our priorities and from the regional view is Region 1 has over 9 million square feet of bridge deck area, which we're actually rated, which is second in the state for regions of what the DOT owns. And 25% of that bridge deck area is on I-90 between the Lark Dove interchange and the Patroon Island Bridge, and then from the Patroon Island Bridge down to the thruway. The bridges in that corridor represent 25% of our deck area. So to give it a regional perspective, that little oval is probably too big to point to where 25% of our bridge deck area is located. Again, this gets to the preservation strategy of our program of keeping those bridges in really good shape because of their magnitude. So that's that one. And then, I'm going to wrap this up quick. Really our bridge programming continues to trying to see if we can get an emphasis on bridge replacements because we're not at pace to catch up or keep up. But that's definitely a challenge. But since we're not replacing them at the cycle you would think we need to, it leads to our preservation strategy to keep everything in as good a shape as we can. Another thing is, as much as this data is all state bridges and local bridges, we try not to view them as just our bridge and not our bridge when programming. We're trying to view them from what is the functional class of what's being served with that bridge. That's what should drive some of the decision making in programming in the future. And obviously the asset management component is clearly part of that. But like I said, I just wanted a quick snapshot of the DOT network. Any questions for me on that?
Has the decrease in flags, red and yellow?
Yep.
Is there any correlation with the bridge preservation program coming online?
I would think that that's helped because we've forced ourselves to get after the element specific stuff. Get after the flag and don't replace the bridge. Just fix what's wrong and move on. And that does appear to be paying some dividends. Our structures engineer looks good from that metric because the flags are down, but at the same token, it does only last so long before
That was the other thing I was gonna say, then you got a cycle. Yeah.
someday eventually we have to really get after some replacements because it only gets you so far fixing it so many times.
But also within your office or something, then there'd have to be a follow-up to say, okay, here's the work that was done in certain locations on certain bridges under preservation. And then maybe do follow-up and say, okay, how's flagging been on that after that preservation?
Yeah, and there are
Bridges.
bridges.
Seeing as you're working from home now and there's not much,
No, but it's easier. There are bridges that are sort of perennial flags, that are constant issues. They just keep coming back because we can't afford to replace it, but we keep it safe and open. And then, there's always the new ones, surprise, inspection comes in and we got to fix that now.
I mean, in general, that's how it works. I mean, the inspectors are out there during the summertime. Our bridge maintenance people, assessments made depending on the severity of it, whether we can do it in-house or it needs to be programmed or it needs to be done by an emergency contract. And then in the wintertime, the engineers that aren't involved with the snow and ice program, they take all the inspections from the prior year and come up with a work program again for the following year for what the stuff could be in-house, the stuff that could go to contract, or things that really need work even in the winter time when time there. I mean, it goes perfectly to the point you're at. It has resulted in a lot more element specific work, the way that, it sort of takes a cross section foot by foot by foot, the way that it's done now, the inspections. It does, but if you identify one bad joint on a piece of interstate, the maintenance of traffic costs you 5 times what it would be the repair to them. So you sort of want to, it's a good time to do something else. There's always, bearing work or I mean, just like the job that's coming out, that 890. I mean, how many hundreds of bearings are on that bridge? I mean, you might as well replace them, even if you're out there in MPT, even if only 80 of them have an issue, you're still going to replace them all.
Right. Just as an aside, looking at the history of state-owned bridges from 40s onward, did you find a particular bridge design held up better over time than another? Because looking back, I mean, state designed them back then. That it was done in-house, and a lot of the structural design, was pretty impressive.
The modern multi-girder, redundant, boring cookie cutter bridge is kind of our go-to because it's easy to fix, easy to preserve, and
also the maintenance of traffic is a primary driver with the multi-girder, that you can keep a lane open and can stay on the same alignment. I mean, some of the trusses we have last forever until the deck area finally gives out. But the problem with those is they were great at the time. They may be 120 years old, but there's no redundancy there's no way to build it in stages. So you got to bring something off the line. So the multi-girder is the primary, unless it's a signature sort of structure. But that's the go-to, is the multi-girder. And you can span anything to avoid something in the water as well now too. And, they can span 130, 140 feet pretty easily without touching the water. So
We do need to move on, but I want to give Liz this
Oh, I just
notification.
wanted to know, basically, what's the funding gap? You're preserving because you don't have the budget to replace. If you could, replace every bridge you wanted to replace, and we could get sort of caught up on maintenance, et cetera, what's that dollar amount? Just a rough idea. What's the shortfall, and is there any chance of getting it in the future, or some of it at least?
that is a very good question, and there are needs assessments done, and I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it's large,
A billion,
it's a difficult question because, again, it goes back to the infrastructure and the use and the value of those bridges over the Hudson or over over any of them, even the low volume ones over the interstate. It's not like it's a resource we can just get more of. So those.
I just wondered how big that gap is.
I mean, I think even conservatively, it would be a couple $1 billion.
Yeah, well, just
even within
having gone over
the
the
area.
Tappan Zee in the recent past, it was just like,
And we were looking at the Troy Manans, we're like, a couple $100 million plus for 378, that crossing of the Hudson, which is well beyond any sort of programming numbers that we get to discuss.
And one final question, and we will move on.
I just wanted to quickly follow up on the economic cost. And so, like, even if it's low volume or functional class, like the detour has a certain cost, it might connect to important freight facilities or that type of stuff. So there's other, I just kind of following up on what you said, I wanted to sort of throw that in there, that there are several dimensions of that.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you for all the great questions. We'll certainly follow up with you folks on some of the questions you had and be providing additional information as we move into the programming process. With that, Steve,
Yeah.
we'll move on.
Moving on, action items, is that what we're
We
into?
are.
Fiscal constraint discussion, is that you, Sandy? Is that who's gonna?
I
lead
will
that?
try, oh my goodness. Well, I had it up there. Somebody can see where,
You can see.
right here?
No, on the bottom, I'll show all of this.
All the way in the bottom.
I can't, can you help me? I really can't
Go
see
to the
that.
last block.
You got it?
All
I don't
windows.
see either.
There's too many windows.
The block. The,
Show all
the big square.
Yeah.
The big square?
Yeah,
That one?
that one.
Click
A
that.
little bit
Okay.
more.
Sorry, folks.
North.
We will definitely have a laptop for you
gotta
next
be on
time.
it. You gotta be on that.
You
Right
gotta
there.
get on it.
On the back.
You can just press the
It's a touch
screen.
screen.
Thank you, and then hit share us, please.
You're hired.
Share.
Share.
It's on the bottom of these ones.
There it is, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, sorry folks, I have terrible eyes.
You did a job.
So this is the typical reporting to you folks on fiscal constraint before we get into TIP amendments. As you can see from the table, we are fiscally constrained. We're actually a little currently under-programmed by year. And in terms of fund source, we have some programming capacity in the NHPP fund source. Actually, we're over-programmed, I should say, in the NHPP fund source. And we're under, though, for all of the fund sources combined. So any questions about fiscal constraint? Okay.
That was easy, Sandy.
That was easy.
Everybody's.
Thank you. Looking at FHWA's position towards fiscal constraint, the infrastructure bill goes through, there's going to be a lot of activity. It's probably going to cause fiscal constraint to be impacted negatively. Are
Yeah.
they going to loosen the reins a bit, or have they said anything to that respect?
I don't know, Maria Chow is with us today. Maria, do you have an assessment yet from Federal Highway perspective on fiscal constraint related to the infrastructure bill?
We do not have anything at this point.
Okay, but we'll certainly keep an eye on that. Obviously with new money potentially coming in, we'll have to see the impacts of all of that, absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Item five, local pedestrian safety action plan, PSAP projects. Who's presenting on that?
I will have our friends at DOT talk about that.
So there were 4 local PSAP projects, I guess, came to the table a couple of years ago, for Albany, Schenectady, Rensselaer, and Clifton Park, to get after systemic pedestrian upgrades to enhance pedestrian safety. As part of a statewide initiative, when the projects were presented, it was indicated that they were capped, but there's different discussions around capped and money available. And essentially, it was a clarification that there was so much funds provided by main office for the projects, but it didn't represent a hard cap like other solicitations that we see, like TAP or CMAQ, where that is it. You can't get more. These were given some more flexibility, and as they got to construction or near construction, a couple of them needed a few more dollars to get the work done. And we consulted with CDTC about this, and within the realm of project selection being small dollar amounts, less than 250,000, we tried to help a couple of sponsors out to get a few more dollars to get their projects over the plate. And it was a clarification to what was a capped program to now not.
So it's based on an engineer's estimate, or these haven't been lettered, right?
Rents, Clifton Park was let and the award was a little high. So we were able to adjust that upwards to get the award package out. And City of Schenectady is based on an engineer's estimate, and that's getting advertised, I believe, now for a letting. City of Rensselaer was already out the door. That actually came in under. I thought it was over. It's confusion. It was under the overall budget. And the City of Albany is still working on theirs.
So there could be changes, additional changes?
Could be, but, you know,
as long as they're minimal. I mean, we could have taken the stance literally that these were capped, end of discussion like that. But regionally, it's in a fund source that traditionally is statewide, is not over-programmed. So out of the regional allocation, it said we had 4 good candidates, 4 good projects. They were within the scope. Let's attribute a little more money to those. And because we at least want to have a conversation, disclosure, to have a conversation here, because they were below the 250,000 to be just an administrative change on our part. We at least wanted to make everybody aware that that was the intent.
So there's no action, it's just for information?
Just information. They're all below the 250,000 that would need to go to planning.
Yeah, we just wanted to make sure you were aware of these changes. And again, pedestrian safety is an emphasis area for the state of New York. So that was another reason we really wanted to make sure we could support the completion of these projects. So, yep.
Item 6, 2019 to 24 Transportation Improvement Program proposed amendments. Now, are we taking every one of these individually? Is that the plan? Is that?
Most of these, the DOT ones probably will need to take individually. Is that fair?
I don't think we have issue if they're collectively.
Okay.
I mean, basically, the projects that we had submitted to the statewide selection teams, the statewide asset teams, gave the go-ahead on these 5 projects. They actually result in a net $4.5 million back into the kitty for CDTC area that would roll into the next programming cycle. So
Motion.
they just, that's what I mean. All right.
So-
We
so
can say
just-
no, I guess.
So just for clarification, it's items A, B, C, D, and E on your agenda. So those 5 is what we're referring to. We're
At least briefly touch on it.
I want to touch on each one quickly. But
Absolutely.
I'd like to.
One motion.
Yeah. So the first one is, there's 2 safety projects that came out of this. One is the intersection of Route 9 at 146 in Clifton Park. Was identified for some safety enhancements that qualifies for HSIP. And, that the old design intersection with the slip ramps are the major issue there that we need to take care of, but they're going to look at the whole situation and figure out what's best for that intersection. The following one is Route 29 at Rowland Street up in, it's on the line of the city of Saratoga and Milton. Route 29 at Rowland Street, there's an accident pattern there that's probably going to be remedied by a turn lane, but again, we got to figure out exactly the best fix at that intersection. Moving on to the third project is I-890, the piece of concrete pavement from the Mohawk River back to basically almost to the bridges over the circles there by General Electric, exit 3. It's the concrete piece that's been long needing attention. It kind of represents our last worst piece of interstate in the region, and we were finally given a major rehabilitation to get that brought up to standard. So that'll be a good thing for the interstate network. And the next 2 are some pavement preservation projects to get after some resurfacing. I-87 exits 15 to 16 in Saratoga County. This one is on the tip in year 4 right now with core funds. This brings the project forward a year to 22 and makes it funded outside the regional program, this is the $4.5 million that gets to come back to the CDTC coffers at the program update. So that's the money that comes back. And the last one is the multi-site, our state pavement set aside, which gets after multi-site paving. They've given us 25 million to get after several sites in the 4 counties. I listed them in the tip letter. I'm not going to go through each one, but for your information, we listed them by county. So you can see when we're paving another road near you next year. So that represents the 5 tip amendments.
You didn't say roundabout when you talked about Milton, did you?
No,
Okay.
but they haven't started yet.
Yeah.
I don't envision that there.
Yeah, I don't see I just thought I heard it.
No, a turn lane most likely.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good. I traveled that.
Yes.
So just to point out that all of 5 of these projects are being funded outside of our planning targets. So with respect to, this is a question I had, the Saratoga County resurfacing project on the Northway, we had NHPP funding assigned to that. That's gonna go back into the kitty for the
Yes.
region. I just wanted to make sure you were all aware that, that those funds will be returned to us.
Can I go on the same project?
Yep.
That's, we're talking federal fiscal year. So when you're saying 21, 22, we're looking in.
These are all going to be let for construction in the calendar year of 22, but also federal 22. So after October 1st of this year, starts federal
Later
later.
this year.
Yeah.
For construction.
Yeah, next year's construction.
Any other questions on these amendments?
Just excellent projects. We appreciate, the support and happening in Clifton Park with that intersection.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's all right. So we're all good? Are we ready?
I second John's motion.
Motion to approve. A, B, C, D, and E.
Absolutely.
New York State DOT tip amendments. We have a motion from John, a second. Is that Mark, will you second?
Yep.
All right, second, we have a second, any further discussion? We'll do roll call, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, abstained? Motion carries. All right, moving on. Additional tip amendments, right? We're looking at individually taking these, F, G, H.
These are a combined presentation. I'll let Ross describe it for you
I think they do have to have them
individually.
individually because each one impacts the other one.
Correct.
All right, so I'll try and make this summary because this is the longest, officially the longest tip letter, amendment letter we've sent. To try to summarize it, last meeting we had talked about improvements that CDTA wants to do to our red line BRT, which is now past 10 years. In addition to that, the amount of pedestrian improvements that we have made on, for example, the blue line are not at the scale that we did on the red line. Just a different time, permissions, different roadway owners, different people involved, et cetera. So we can do a lot more. We want to do a lot more. And so what we are going to do is take first the money from that was from the BRT set aside for the Uncle Sam Transit Center, which, as we've talked about in the past, is a project that is, I'll still say on hold, because it could be that we use future BRT set aside money for that project. But as of right now, as I think most people know, the condition of the garage is really the biggest issue. Last thing we want to do is build a transit center next to a garage that's, well, now is not functioning, and we don't know the future of. We have explained that to the FTA for many, many years. This has now gotten to the point where the FTA is saying, okay, this money's just getting too old and you can't keep saying you're waiting for a garage that no one knows what the future of is. So they've said you got to repurpose it. We brought up the point that it would go back into a BRT line, obviously on the red line, and they were good with that. What they just need us to do is to take that money, which was from a previous tip, move it into this tip. So that's step one. That money then goes into the BRT set aside. That's step two. And then step three is that money and the remainder, a good remainder of the BRT set aside. There'll be some money left in year three, but the majority of what's on the BRT set aside now gets moved into the new project, which is the red line upgrade. So again, money from the previous tip moved into this tip, that money goes into BRT set aside, BRT set aside, money gets drawn out to a new project for the red line.
Is that clear to everybody or?
It's each table shows these changes if you, I'm sure everyone read them in great detail. They'll move into Andrew just asked what year they'll move into, which is the 2021, 22.
And take it individually. Why, Ross? Help me out. Why they individually?
Because we have to show that each step occurred before the other one.
Correct.
Okay, so, okay.
Yeah.
G relies on F, H relies on G.
Yes.
Right.
So you're asking us now to consider F, which is exactly what? Which is the moving of previous, the money from the previous tip that was put into a project into this tip.
That was the, what you just talked about.
That was the old sand money that's now old and needs to come back into this tip. Is that the best way to explain it?
This is a bit of an administrative exercise,
Yes.
just because of the formality of the steps. So at the end of the day, the net impact is we're just adding some old money back into this current TIP so that it can be used for other projects.
Any other
Make a
questions?
motion to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a
Second
second?
it.
Second. Michael, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Okay, Ross, we're looking at G now, which depended on F, right?
And that money is now, it's now in this tip, based on your vote, what just happened, will now be requested to move into the BRT sets.
I'll move for G after.
Thank you, Michael. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Andrew. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Now we're into H, Ross. Any explanation needed here?
H is that money from that's now in the BRT set aside gets drawn out into a new project, which is the red line bus upgrades.
Bus upgrades. Okay.
Make motion to
Questions?
approve.
Motion, second. Michael. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. You good, Ross? Right?
They're good.
All right. So we're moving into item 7, Sandy. Is that where we're at?
are,
Draft
yep.
Tip application and evaluation update. Who is charged
So
with this?
I will start the conversation, and we'll involve a few folks in the room. So, we have been talking over this last year about the pending tip update and the improvement and upgrades and modernization, if you will, to some of our tip materials for the solicitation and the evaluation process. So today we're going to be looking for action from you on approving the tip project application, the use of the JOT form essentially, and our merit score sheet. But before we get into the needed actions, we wanted to present to you folks in a little more detail about what we've got going on here and why. So we're going to start with the, oh my goodness, this was not a good idea on my part, and I apologize. Let me try from here. We're going to start with this bridge discussion paper. And this, when we talked about, had these presentations earlier today, it was to set the context for this aspect of the conversation related to the tips. So we did get a comment, obviously, from the Department of Transportation on how we view and evaluate bridges in our process. Those of you who've been around for a while know that our typical process is we take in all of the project applications, we categorize them in broad categories such as pavement, bridge, bicycle, pedestrian, etc. We develop scores by category for each of the projects proposed, and then we go through a programming exercise. And the idea is that we're not directly comparing a bridge score to a pavement score. And I'm showing the New Vision recommendations here because, and I'm sorry, am I sharing my screen so it goes out in the universe there? I may not be. if Chris Bauer, if you can help me with that, that would be great. But basically, you know, we've talked in New Visions about the importance of bridge and road infrastructure, and you know, some of the things that we can do here to help further emphasize that. And one of the things we did is just accomplish the local bridge study. Looked at, you know, some how to allocate TIP resources for preservation and renewal, and some other short-term repairs, looking at the bigger picture here with replacements and what have you. But moving forward, you know, there's been a concern raised on the part of NISDOT that the actual end score for bridges is low, and potentially implying to those who don't understand the context that they may not be as important as a pavement project. So we, as an example, you know, let's just say a bridge might have a final total score of 10, which may indicate within the bridge category, it could be the top bridge. But when you see road projects scoring 50, 60, 70 points, again, to those that aren't at this table and don't have the context, the appearance might be that this is not as important. Am I portraying that correctly from your perspective at DOT?
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate Sandy and the staff taking some time to sort of listen to us. I think it's very pertinent to the conversation we had. A lot of times you talk about a bridge and the first thing that comes up is the score. That's all somebody wants to hear about. Or when it's even potentially a candidate type program, it may not necessarily things like economic competitiveness or resiliency or traffic operations if a bridge is closed. I'm not necessarily sure, you know, a pavement project or some other, they always have a champion behind them and it can check more boxes with it. I think sometimes maybe bridges just get rated by their condition rating and that's sort of it. So we appreciate that and hearing us out about maybe, you know, maybe there are a few more points to be had for these bridges and some of these other categories.
Flag rating, if it's yellow flag.
Not even the rating, get away sort of the thing we're talking about, the functional component of it. I'm talking about anything over the river or over the interstate. I think it's got, you know, it's got traffic implications, got economic development implications. I don't care what the volume is. And just sort of a recognition of that maybe, you know, as we go forward programming into this.
But I'm confused. No, I mean, typically you have amount of money that we're going to program for bridges, the amount of money we're going to program for pavement, and they're not really competing, or are we talking about in the, you know, I mean.
That's a sort of separate discussion as a group of how you want to split the pie when we know how big the pie is for each of these. I'm just purely, this was related to the intermodal sort of scoring analysis that's done by staff here. But I mean, right, the next step is sort of, well then.
Yeah, because a bridge is, I mean, you're never going to, like a pedestrian project's never going to compete with a bridge, I'm assuming. I mean, but so there's, I mean, but it doesn't mean you don't want to do pedestrian projects. It's not like we're going to do all bridges.
Right. I don't think with this discussion we're proposing changing the percentages or anything. And I mean that's a separate discussion within the New Visions document.
Right.
I guess part of it is the other layer of it is sometimes there's a bridge that has some importance to it, but it's still low volume, but I think it's had a lower side of volume, but it's still a high impact to detour and severing a connect, you know, and if the condition's really poor, but otherwise it doesn't check many other boxes, we're looking for a way to bring it up even within the bridge category if it's really in poor condition. Because otherwise it'll never.
And that could be a sponsored priority thing though too, right? Or is that not a,
you know, like I said, they usually just stand on a condition rating and maybe the traffic volume is another thing that's looked at. But within a bigger context or regional context, these things are pretty important. I mean, you know, you talk to our bridge folks and the roads are just there to connect the bridges together. That's you know, sometimes you know, they don't necessarily have the same champions for the project that some of the other investments do. That was our point.
So our staff thought about this and came up with some options for your consideration, and we're going to walk through each one a little bit in detail for you today. We'll start with the merit score sheet. One approach we could take is revising the merit score sheet evaluation criteria, particularly in the areas of the preservation renewal category on specific infrastructure and the security and resiliency category to allow bridges to have an opportunity to score points that they might not be today. So I'm going to ask Carrie, if I can bring it up for you, Carrie, to kind of walk through the proposed changes to the merit score sheets. Let me see if I can bring that up right here.
There are a few in the environmental mitigation categories, which are not a result of the discussion about the bridges. But those are just to better align with the draft application form that staff put together. The other more substantive changes are in appropriate infrastructure. Can you just scroll down and let you see that? Stop there. All right, so in the top category, the definition of regional significance is expanded to include bridges that carry an NHS route or across the Mohawk or Hudson. And then it also changes language about a bridge lacking a redundant.
Hey, Carrie, could you project here a little bit? I'm having trouble hearing you over here.
Be louder.
Be louder, please.
It also changed language about a bridge lacking a redundant parallel route, being a facility with greater importance to be a bridge with a detour of over a mile.
Thank you.
That's the 4 points. Okay, and then go down to security and resiliency. Not here. Stop.
Sorry, it's the mouse.
That's what.
There it
Got
is.
it.
There it is.
Okay, so it has an additional category for a higher point value, that's 3 points. And that is for imminent full closure over 24 hours or with a detour over 1 mile. And then the bigger category down below is showing bonus points. And those are all related to vulnerability and proximity to a critical facility.
You guys looked at this previously?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it does change our split of the money. It
So
just,
that's the summary of the changes that are due for today.
So adding those all up and putting those towards a bridge, that will have the desired effect of bringing its merit score up to where it needs to be.
I'm not, and there is no what it needs to be. Instead of 15, they may get 35 or 30 points. But just trying to throw in some plugs for the bridges.
But the need for the subjective assessment is going to be critical, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it would, yeah, something that's important, but doesn't get, it felt like somehow they're not getting caught when it's got a big detour. It feels like it's still getting really low points, and it may bring it up above a higher volume bridge, which may be the appropriate thing, but at least it'll bring it into the discussion. So we can talk about it as a group and say, hey, wow, this one rose up. Should we consider it? Or, and again, it's all committee decision at the end of the day, but at least it,
So this concern is really for bridge comparisons, bridge to bridge?
yes.
Right.
Okay.
So it's
So,
internal, that everybody would know that what we're looking at are just bridges. Like you were saying, trying to keep the conversation in here only, we would know. Does it do anything? Let me go back to the Joe conversation, okay? Does it do anything to buttress the review of rural bridges in comparison to urban setting, bridges in urban settings?
It could a little bit, to the point that rural bridges are much more likely to have a big detour, you know, so.
So things that may not have been looked at before may be picked up.
Might not have been looked at numerically.
Yeah,
Looked
yeah.
at
Rating wise.
subjectively.
Yeah.
And I will say, you know, Mike Franchini chose not to review the components of the benefit cost ratio in our updates this last year. That was his decision. Moving forward, you know, I think staff here would like that opportunity in the coming years. We won't have time to do it for this update, unfortunately, but I think, you know, we haven't looked at a lot of these components in quite a long time. There may be new ways of looking at identifying bridge benefits that we're not capturing in our current process. So those will be things moving forward. We'll certainly look at, because I think what may be happening again, as I said at the beginning, is folks in this term understand what those scores mean, but when these folks have to share it with others within DOT and they see a rating of 10 and they might say, well, why is the scoring so low? So out of context, it's hard for outside folks to grasp what we're doing at this table. So this is one method proposed for your consideration.
This is option one.
This is option one. Carrie, while we're here, did you want to walk through any of the other changes? I think there were some text changes to a few of the criteria.
So the only new changes for today are the ones in red. So there was 3 categories. The only one besides the 2 related to is the environmental mitigation category, which is not substantive, and it's to make it align with the way that the draft application was created, so that the questions you're answering are directly related to the scores.
On the critical facilities, I mean, isn't there a relationship to, freight facilities as well? Should we add some kind of a category in there as well to get that kind of economic impact as well?
We could certainly do that, but perhaps we can come up with a term like intermodal facility, ports like Port of Albany, airports, those kinds of land uses. That's what you're thinking?
Yeah, or if there are there are specific facilities identified in the freight plan, right? So maybe that's another way to
Do some freight network.
There might be a way to do it from the freight network as well. Yeah, we could consider doing that. Absolutely, we can add that to that critical facility list.
My second comment was, and this may we're not to option 3 yet, but it seems like some combination of option 1 and 3, or at least option 3, to kind of bring the scores up to parity, might be needed.
So let's walk through the other 2 options and we'll come back to that point. Thank you, Carrie, for sharing that. The next option option 2 is, other than the editorial comment that was made on the environmental score that is not related to this bridge discussion, we would keep the merit score sheet as it was prior to this meeting today. And in terms of programming, make it more clear to you folks how we're utilizing the New Vision's budgets to guide the programming process. I think one of the things I've observed in recent TIP updates is we haven't always provided a framework for you folks to start the programming step. And by framework, I will show you how the TIP aligns with, this is terrible, I'm so sorry, folks. This is what I wanted. Share screen. This is not as easy as you think. Okay, so just this is straight from the current TIP. Just for your information, part of what we do as an NPO, of course, is we develop the long-range transportation plan, within which there's the financial plan. We use that to help guide a programming process. So this pie chart represents what the previous version of New Vision's, at the time it was New Vision's 2040, had in our budget for full implementation of the plan by different categories. Highway operations is more the maintenance category, for those that are not familiar with that terminology. Pavement and bridge is more the rehabs, the reconstructions, that type of work. We have the transit capital and service category, and then this broad other category, which includes everything I didn't just mention, like PED, freight, projects we do for technology, ITS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a sense of emphasis when we might start the programming process, which we can use to guide programming the current TIP. This table, or this pie chart, I should say, represents a summary of what the actual funding, how it was actually allocated in the 2019 TIP. So you can see a big chunk of it, 49% went to highway operations. Again, that's your maintenance stuff. We had 18% going to your pavement and bridge reconstructions, repairs, 19% to transit, and 14% to other. So when you look back, we actually funded more than we budgeted in New Visions for maintenance, a little less for all of the other categories, a little more for transit, and much less for the pavement and bridge, which I think comes back to the point that the NISTOT folks are making regarding bridge replacements and some of that hard infrastructure.
Wasn't that some the policy decision about maintenance instead of
Right, at the time there was the preservation first.
preservation first, right?
Correct.
That wasn't necessarily our decision.
Well, we are sort of, we don't have the same ability to program non-preservation type work that the municipalities may have. For that reason, even for us to put a bridge replacement on the program, we need to get the main office approval for it as a beyond preservation type project. So some of that is certainly reflected in there. I think when our candidates are submitted, there are very few bridge replacements. They're usually rehab, right? Or smaller type scope. But that doesn't, the municipalities don't have that. The majority of their bridge projects are usually replacement in nature.
Is there some benefit to breaking out? I mean, we're lumping pavement and bridge together, and does that make sense to be pavement? Should bridge be a separate category? I know this is just kind of a snapshot,
This is just a snapshot,
but you don't, you
correct.
really wouldn't get a sense of, all right, when you lump pavement and bridge together, well, how much bridge work was done versus how much. And if bridges are, obviously, we know how critical they are. Maybe we should.
It should probably match the categories in the program update. As by the highway operating, I assume we're talking the preservation projects. But your pavement and bridge are a different sort of element. Even on the pavement side, DOT is proposing, we don't propose anything beyond preservation either in the, so, which.
And operations to me is not maybe a great term to use. I mean,
These
from a
are-
layman's stand, you
That
look
probably
at
should
this
be
and say
pavement
operations.
preservation.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't know, well, what does that mean? Is that all,
I will say that, our New Vision, staff has talked about this. We have continued to use these legacy terms since New Visions was first created in the 90s. And we have not really taken a hard look at how we're categorizing things in New Visions. And I think in the next version of New Visions, that this pie chart and these terms will certainly change. But I think what this can do, at least for this update, is give us an initial framework. And to Bob's point, we can then use this to further break it down into the project categories we're familiar with when programming the TIP, and give some sense to all of us about where our emphasis will be. These are not hard and fast rules in terms of how the percentages that you're seeing here. This is simply to help guide the conversation. We can work with everyone here on the planning committee at a future meeting in terms of identifying the program. We'll call it the programming targets, if you will, for the different types of assets and different project types that come in. But this would be another way to address the concern, I think, that DOT raised with respect to bridges. So, any other comments on this framework?
Just from at least my perspective, I like the original adding to a specific project and the meaningfulness of that project in terms of the category. I see those numbers as more of a litmus test after. I wouldn't want to set dollar amounts that we then need to fill projects into like that. The project still should dictate the selection, and then you look back, and if we're that far off in a particular one, you sort of adjust back to the center, but not, especially in such a long-term vision document. Like I say, I see that more as a litmus test than a trip, because things change weekly nowadays.
Yes, they do.
So I was gonna say, Sandy, is getting to Bob's point about things changing weekly too, is just looking over like the last 20 years, the data that's now available, massive amount of data, and just from the two presentations this morning, you know, we have the tools now through like Power BI just from our own desktops to manipulate that data and create slicers and subsets of data. So I do think it's something that's going to constantly evolve, and even like your last chart with those categories, we'll have that flexibility to further break stuff down just to really the levels that we haven't talked about previously, because it was we didn't have those capabilities right at our own desktop, but it used to be a call to CDTC or Mark for census data. Now I can say, give me the data sets and I can manipulate it. So it'll be interesting to see how these conversations go.
Sandy, do we need to move on to option 3?
We'll move on to option 3. So option 3 involves a proposal. Oh, I brought up the walls. No, that's it. I am so sorry for the view. Hold on. Bear with me.
1000%.
I know. Think as large as humanly possible. Is that bigger? There we go. Okay. So this option is another very, option for your consideration that NISDOT proposed, which is to have a weight added to the score, the total score, after we're done scoring them essentially, that considers the functional classification as well as whether the bridge is urban or rural, and then its broad bridge condition. And it kind of gets to the point you were trying to make earlier, Mike. Did you want to elaborate on this concept a little bit?
Yeah, this is what started the conversation. Was I sent ideas over to just for discussion. This is our idea, and this is what sort of fed the discussion that created option 1 of altering the merit sheet as presented earlier. But this idea gets after the functional class is your one column, where the lower the functional class, the less bonus points you can get, which makes sense. But clearly the importance of the bridge and the status of the bridge drive the points. And I mean, if it's an interstate and it's closed, well, I don't think that would ever happen, knock on wood, so I don't see anyone ever getting 25 points for a closed interstate bridge. But the other categories of a local road that's closed or load posted is a highly likely scenario, but it doesn't get nearly as many bonus points, but at least brings it up. This was our initial proposal, which spurred the conversation. I'm not going to sell this one as much as I think we like. I don't know. I think
You're looking at 1 and 3, aren't you? You're looking at
Well, it could be a combination of the
Yeah,
two, right?
yeah.
I mean, this is where we started.
If you had this in a vacuum that you were working on prior to seeing option 1,
Right.
rather than points, could these be multipliers to 1?
Yeah, but are you doing this just for bridges?
Yeah.
Or are you gonna do, well, no, I'm saying, what about the other uses they're gonna also want?
Does staff have a recommendation or does DOT have a preference?
Multiply them all.
Options?
If you like this one, it's my idea. If you don't like it, it's like I said, this is where you start. These could be base points to start, and then there's still, based on the other categories, you could add upon this, and it's all still relative. It doesn't change the pavement scores or the trail score or any of the other projects. It would just be, instead of 10s, we would be talking about 60s and 70s or maybe not 50s for bridge projects.
Doesn't number 2 of the pie chart even just give us guidance as a preliminary step?
Right. That would be a preliminary step that, I think what staff was thinking with that second option was giving the department and all the local sponsors as well some direction, and also making sure that we are emphasizing the need to consider bridge replacements and some of that sort of tougher project that we haven't done in a while. Again, because we were doing preservation first and we saw the progress we made, but clearly some of the worst bridges were getting worse. Sorry for the poor language. So we do have to start touching upon some of the lower rated bridges.
But that would even,
replacing.
that would even give us, you know, how we have our initial discussions. We keep going, it's okay, well, how much are we gonna move into this category? How much are we gonna put in? That, the pie chart and stuff will give us that to start with.
Yep.
Then, once you have that amount that's in a category, then you take the merit and the criteria to go through that with what you have added in there with the red additions and stuff. And define, it's almost like you wanna meld everything that's in here.
I still think you get fixed with that second one. I still like it as an after look litmus
Second
test kind of,
Well,
with the
you put
pie
it
chart
at
and
the
the
end.
breakdown, because you never know. I mean, this, if a bill gets passed this week, it may be very heavy bridge emphasis on it.
But what if we looked at it and said, okay, when we get, just as you said, when we get done, and we've looked and said, okay, this is not what we're adopting yet. Then we go back and see, can you look at, does it fit with
Well, I
this?
think it's already there. I mean, that is the new vision document,
No,
basically.
but I'm saying, do we
the
fit
second
with
one.
what's in there? Do we-
We should always be looking at that. Whatever program we construct should go back and it should meet the principles of that document itself.
I guess the other thing about pre-prescribing the mix of programming ahead is we don't want to encourage or discourage sponsors from a category that's their priority. You know, if we pre-prescribe a category, I don't know what everyone thinks are on the table, but I don't want people to walk away going, well, we didn't prescribe enough that category, so I'm standing a chance I'm not going to put a project forward, even though it could be a really good project.
Yeah.
So that's where the pre-prescribing gets tricky. You know, we should present all the projects to the table as we always do, and have our discussions. And this is a really good project, and yeah, we may inflate that category a little bit.
We've only got to
This-
February, you know.
This tip update, I know. You know, this tip update, we may inflate this category, but we got to after some good stuff, whatever category that is.
Is there a way, because we won't know the benefits and the drawbacks, so is there, with looking at all this until the numbers come out, is there a way to take the old tip, whenever it was approved, use whatever rating system you want, show how that means, okay, that means these 5 bridges would have been in, but
Well,
these 5 to 10 other projects would have been out. And then that's a way for us to finally say, because right now we're looking at numbers. What we really need to know is how does this rating system increase the number of here?
yes, so to that point, we did a little exercise with the NISDOT staff here on testing a couple of bridges. These were, I think most of these NISDOT had proposed in the 2019 tip.
Two of them at least, maybe 3, but yeah, 2 or 3 of them we proposed in the 19 tip, and they didn't get funded
I think, yeah.
For replacement.
for replacement.
Yes, so everything that you're seeing here, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 bridges here. There's one project with two bridges included in one bundled project, are replacements. So we ran our traditional scoring process, and the end result of that, and this was using the merit score sheet before the additions that Carrie included. So this would be what we would normally have presented you folks. And this goes back to the point that, you know, the total project score seems low out of context. If we were to add in, and what we did here is add in the add-on points that I just showed you, if we were to weight them and what that would do to the scores, and it would bring them up. That in combination with what Carrie shared would bring it up further. Now, where it changes things, as you can see, where you have a closed bridge, that gets the biggest bump, right? Whereas if you have a structurally deficient bridge, it brings it up somewhat, and then a load posted bridge, it brings it up some more. The biggest impact was on the closed bridge, and maybe for good reason in that case. So, you know, I think from a staff perspective, I know we were initially uncomfortable about trying to sort of finagle scores. But when you step back and you think about the presentation of this, I think, you know, certainly the proposal in option 1 makes sense. if it's enough to satisfy the concerns that NISTA has. If we want to go this extra step and add in this, what I'll call a weighted score at the end of the scoring process, it will just change the shape of how that category is sorted at the end of the day. And it would emphasize certain types of bridge over others. Andrew, did you want to weigh in on any of that, just from your perspective?
I mean, regarding the bonus points that you can see here, some of these bridges are getting enough bonus points to move from being in last place to being in first place. And some of the bonus points that are being proposed for the either the condition of the bridge or the functional class, we already account for those in the quantitative portion of the scores. If you scroll just to the left a little, you can see we use the travel model to estimate the use of the bridge and what impact there would be if that bridge closed, and the condition, or rather the improvement in condition expected if the repairs are conducted. That's the other big factor in the quantitative score. So the proposed additional points you see there in the NISTOC condition score, in some ways they're already accounted for, so we may be double counting for factors that are already incorporated. But when you put them into discrete bins like this, there's a little less granularity to it than you would get from us using the travel model to model what would happen if the bridge were closed.
But can I say, it's really not, we're not really, with the DOT condition score, we're really not talking about condition right there. We're talking about the functional class. So even though you listed in the spreadsheet, the structurally deficient or closed or whatever, but it's all driven by the functional class of the road.
Right.
And this goes big to the heart of our conversation. Relative, none of those projects changed except for Nelson Ave over the Northway.
Not actually closed, it's just
Not-
an illustration.
Right,
of
right. So really, but that's at the heart of the kind of discussion, how important a piece of infrastructure like that is. Should it be closed?
So it is based on, it could be closed. I mean, how do you, it's at a point where you're going to have to close it? Or is this a bridge that is closed?
If it does not get on this tip cycle, it will be closed.
Okay, that's the, within the 5-year period or something.
Then you're going to deal with peak delays.
So
So with the issue about redundancy though, that's.
they're not getting any more points because of that condition. though. That's all I'm saying. They're getting
Right.
the condition,
So-
even though we're calling it condition score, it's really based on where that facility,
Detour and
it's what facility that thing is on.
If you take
Coming back to that.
that's the merit score, and then have a call-out box for bridges that incorporates the additional information, is that an approach that could be justified? It's its own thing. That's the problem what I see in the merit score. It's like you're lumping everything together, and what do you predicate upon? What do you predicate your assessment upon? We have a lot of things in the mix. If we take new visions, then there's a lot of things to consider. If we're looking at bridges, we're just looking at bridges. If we're looking at pavement, we're just looking at pavement. So really, I mean, this is where what Joe used to argue about is it's the discussion and the understanding which should drive the funding, not just the cookie cutter approach to putting points towards something and seeing where it comes out.
Oh, I agree. I mean, the end result, I mean, these scores are just information
You're right.
to the planning staff to then, we go all over the place with the list when it comes down to it. But
So
others
what
do
serves
see
the
this.
purpose of that? I mean, that's what it comes
Well,
down to.
Others do see this list, and we do see the projects that we rate that have 50, 60, 70 point, and then there's a bunch of bridges that look like they have 12s and 13s potential.
Yes.
That's all this is.
Somewhat optics.
It's the
Well,
optics.
it's because these pieces of infrastructure are pretty important.
I'm
My
not-
point that
like I
just
said,
going
Bridge-
So
like I
should they
said,
be considered individual?
it's only planning exercise relative to get them in the same ballpark with the rest of investments. But it still is only information for when we have our subsequent meetings by each asset type of which ones get bid.
To help
So
us establish the pie chart is what you're talking about. you're saying.
That's-
Yeah, I mean, to help us establish. I mean,
That's
we're
almost
not-
a
we're not
separate
balanced.
conversation of where the balance, where the money is.
So, Ross, you want to?
Yeah, just I
we're trying to beat around the bush here. It's, what you're trying to do is get more money out of the tip, a bigger pie.
No, I'm not trying to do that at all.
For bridges, which
No,
makes, I think.
No,
what you're
I'm
saying
not.
makes
That's why I
sense.
made the point. That's a separate discussion. The committee could cut the pie the same way they want to, and 25% go to bridges, 30 go to pavement, whatever, just like last time. All this does is that the scores within the bridge column are in the 50s and 60s or 40s instead of at 15. That's completely it.
If that happens.
But none of that drives how the money's split, though.
Does another project
It's
not get funded
higher
because of what you're
scoring.
doing?
No.
Again, it's only information.
That's-
The planning committee would make the decision how far down the list, which ones from the
I think
list.
the other thing that this would do is that you, instead of going from 1 to 10, you're going from 1 to 100. So you get yours, I mean, the difference between a 9 and an 8 is obviously, there's a lot more in between.
Right.
I think
It certainly would help
at
with
the
that as
end of the day, when you look at these three options that we shared with you, the first option, you're going to get it, I'll call it a consistent score, with the changes that Perry went over with the group, which are going to allow a bridge to score some additional points in some categories that are not currently being reflected. To the staff's perspective, that would be the simplest thing to do. The programming step, which is kind of what option 2 is driving at, we can deal with later on. And I think that, when we see what happens with the infrastructure bill and some of the other things that we haven't seen yet from program guidance coming from the main office of DOT, we can address that. But I think the point out we were trying to make is specific to bridges and the issue of replacements and these kinds of things. We are going to have to think about that as a committee. You are going to have to think about that as a committee. And then the third piece, this proposal of sort of weighting it to allow for one bridge to kind of leapfrog over the other in the ranking within the bridge category is really what this is driving. And I think the point that the underlying theme here is trying to provide a little more emphasis based on the functional class of the roadway, so that, an important bridge that may not get some of the, it's not that they're not getting the benefits, it's just that in appearances, a bridge that's scoring a 10 might now get a 30, a la this closed bridge
Explain to me
concepts.
why 3 can't be folded into 1, or why 1 doesn't reflect
It
what
can
we're
be.
talking about.
That's totally your discretion.
I guess I'm gonna weigh in here with, we started the discussion with our table of functional class with the intent to do something ahead of this tip update cycle, hopefully. And I don't think going the double bonus round here is what our intent was to do both. Our intent was to do something. And I think from our perspective, I think the option 1 actually captures our intent pretty thoroughly. It sort of brings some other categories into the fold that we honestly felt previously should have scored and they didn't. So with the language changes and the, some of this other stuff that is presented by Carrie I think gets after what our initial point and bring this discussion forward was. So from our view, I think we prefer the option 1.
What are you asking the committee to do today?
So for today, we need to approve the merit score sheet, regardless of the bridge discussion. But given that we had this additional discussion on the bridges, the action would be, if you agree with option 1, is to approve option 1 with the changes proposed to the merit score sheet.
I don't know if everybody heard Peter. I think that was a really good point here, that it's really not trying to get more for that. It's the 1 through 100 here. It will stretch out all of the bridge candidates with more scores relative in between there. What you see right now is everything between, the bridges are ranked between 5 and 15 on there. So it becomes a very subjective around the table when we're picking it. So all we're doing, I know Greg's back into the 1. I mean, the combination of 1 and 3 would still just spread them out between 100. It doesn't change the money distribution, but it gives more info on which bridges that you want to select.
Couldn't you just do bridge scaling inflator?
That's what that is.
I mean, that's what this methodology would be, except that we're adding in the element of the consideration of the functional
Of the
class.
functional class.
Now, if we could just say, we're gonna take all those bridges and add 20 points, but it doesn't
But
give
that
the
doesn't change,
spread.
that doesn't
Doesn't
spread.
get the spread.
You're still 1 point apart.
And
Yeah,
number
this is
three,
We want to be able to
add
evaluate it
functional
on a
class.
larger spread.
It's the discussion that's been
Not
had
1 to 10.
over a number of years.
So 3 isn't,
Excuse me, can I make a suggestion? Can
Yep.
anybody hear me? Okay, it's hard to jump in when you're doing the video. I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but rather than try to add points to bridges in the merit side, another option might be to de-emphasize the merit score sheet. So instead of counting that equal with the benefit cost ratio, count 2/3, 1/3 or something, and then you've accomplished, I think, the same thing, because I think DOT's concern is that the merit score sheet elevates other projects over some of these bridges. So that way you keep the merit score sheet the way it is, your optics are better. It's an easy thing to do. So I'm just suggesting that as an option.
I'm gonna try to, because I think I finally got it. This is bridge to bridge discussion, so it's not about increasing the score for bridges to then knock out other projects that aren't bridge projects. It's just to make it so you're not comparing a 7 to an 8. You're comparing a 15 to a 50, and it's very clear which bridge project you should select.
Right. And as I said at the beginning, or earlier on, we recognize as staff, we haven't looked at the components of that BC ratio since the 90s. And we need to figure out how we can capture more benefits so that that spread is created. And that's something we can do down the road. Again, we just won't have time for this update.
but that would be option 3 while we
No,
get to.
That
option
wouldn't
three,
be an
that's
option.
future.
This would be a future.
Yeah, I know, but that would get towards maybe what you're
That's the
looking
other
at.
50%,
Right.
not the score sheet.
Right.
Once we get to discussions, if a certain bridge is funded for that applicant or sponsor, they could, as part of the discussion, say, well, even though this ranked below the funding line, our priority is really this one. We'd have the ability to
Correct.
We always
also
do.
do
We
that.
always have that.
Still always have.
I just want to be clear, when you talk about it changes the rank of the individual bridge applications, but not the end result of who gets money and who doesn't. I'm not quite sure how that works if you're bumping up scores of one I mean, I'm not against bumping up scores of bridges. I think that's a good idea because they haven't been. But, you know, there's always somebody who wins and someone who loses. Is that going to change? You're going to give more, I mean, as you said.
I mean, I
is
think
this
Ross
gonna
explained
be-
it well. Instead of, say if we have 20 applications that come in,
Right.
instead of all 20 scores being between 5 and 15, those 20 bridge scores will be now between 5 and 70, maybe.
Right.
But it's still those same. It doesn't change the money
Doesn't change
distribution
how we
at
allocate.
all.
But it aids in the selection of which one.
It helps the
Okay.
committee
Yeah.
to which one it may be better candidate over the other.
So there's,
I'll
there's,
rely on your expertise. on
Yeah,
that.
there's
Core
two.
bridges, just option.
Okay.
for that
I'll make a
happening.
motion to approve the language in option 1 and give staff the discretion to implement a adjusted points scale.
Meaning on option 3.
Give them the option to implement that if it makes sense.
So,
Or did
So that's-
I'd second that.
Is that a motion to progress?
No,
one
I
and
don't
then
understand.
adopt
Now you're
it?
saying to give staff the option to start changing points
Can
as
you
opposed to
restate
the
your-
merit. I mean,
you
or were we
restate that?
getting at
Sure,
your
so,
benefit
so
cost?
it seems to remain to be seen whether the option 1 itself is going to be sufficient. Is that correct, or is that not?
So the main thing that we want to achieve today is before we can even issue a solicitation, we have to let the public know how you're going to be scored, right? So that's what we need to achieve today. Ideally, I'd like to walk out of here with an agreement on the merit score sheet and what we're doing with that and just how we're going to approach this option 3 if that's still on the table. It sounds like option 2 we're gonna remove from the conversation. So it's down to either combining 1 and 3 together, just doing 1 or just doing 3.
But with 1, and correct me if I'm wrong, with 3, you were talking about tweaking the benefit cost.
That will be
That next
not
time.
related to this current
Okay,
update.
but not this current
No.
update. So with the motion, I'm a little confused that we're giving staff the ability to change points. Is that something you're comfortable with? Is that?
So I think what Mark's trying to say is we can further explore this notion of incorporating this draft table that the department developed, this one, into the scoring rubric at the end.
Would that be brought back to the committee?
But it would need to be brought back here.
So basically, we're approving one, and then there's potential if you're coming back to present something else to the committee
Right.
at a later date with a
When
different way.
is that later date though? Because if we're just approving an interim option, that's not going to help us in the long run.
Right, and I do want to state for the record, you know, this is the last planning committee before October. We need to bring this material to our policy board in September, because, you know, we are talking about altering the scoring process. So ideally, we want to leave this meeting today with an agreement. So, you know, we can modify Mark's proposed
We have a motion and a second, right? Are you guys okay with a friendly amendment to that, or whatever you
Yes.
call that?
Now it's open for debate.
You know, that,
With the
Yeah.
second.
Correct.
so.
Can't 3 be incorporated into the scoring?
That's what it's
At
talking
that-
Yeah,
So
is
so
that-
the intent of my motion was to approve the language in number one, which I think we have consensus on, and to give some discretion to staff to implement some scoring adjustments that are consistent with this, or at least result in the outcomes that people want to see in terms of the.
But
The
would that have to come back to the committee
Yes.
anyway? So does it make
Yeah.
any
So it's
sense to be
really
an
is-
emotion? I mean,
it's-
because you're approving one and, I mean,
So-
that's all I'm getting at, is
Well,
that.
one of my favorite things to do with my board is give me discretion.
For the purposes that are needed now,
Right.
let's approve
Yeah,
one,
just do one.
and then staff can continue to work on it. And the same argument or debate can come
Yeah.
back to the table
Well,
when additional information
Well, I
has
mean,
been
Sandy, it is,
processed.
with the functional class-based one, is there issue with those being base points for bridge projects?
No, I think, you know, as you can see from the result, I mean, you know, when we looked at this, you know, clearly it's gonna bump up certain types of bridges, which we would expect.
That 20 is not going to be there because nothing's closed in that.
Right, and again, these were hypotheticals.
Right.
I mean, this was just for testing purposes, but I mean, you know, I think staff is comfortable with the outcome, because ultimately you folks are gonna be the ones making these programming decisions. So even in the case of that sample closed bridge there, hypothetically, you know, if that's not an important bridge for somebody, I'm not saying it is, most bridges are, but you know, the department and you folks have the discretion to say, well, we'll swap out project A for project B. There's still an opportunity, because this again is a tool.
Is the functional class already built into this scoring? Is if that wasn't, if it's a lower functional class bridge, would it not be a 27.3? Would it be a 21 or something? So is what I'm saying, is that already built in?
So Andrew,
to the
you want to
scoring?
reiterate the redundancy that you noted earlier?
The functional class indirectly is part of the DC calculations because more volume results in higher benefits and a higher PC ratio.
We're not doing it.
Similarly, the detour length is also indirectly incorporated because if that bridge were closed, the vehicles would have to travel further. Both of those are part of the benefit part of the PC calculation.
Yeah, but we're saying we're not doing BC.
No, we're not redoing.
We're not
We
redoing.
have
Okay.
these.
All right.
Right, based on your previous comment, you feel that option one does incorporate the majority of this so that the ultimate result meets your needs for the time being.
The only hesitation would be 3 gives a baseline start based on the functional class. The scoring sheet, while those numbers are in there, that is still up to the subjective opinion of the staff. So 3 baseline, bridge, functional class starts with X number of points. Not saying that they're not included part, but if it's based on staff's opinion, what they think of that.
It's the
project.
direct, I think the distinction is the direct correlation versus the indirect correlation that Andrew described.
But you can still have staff recommendations in the merit sheet. And if you take sort of leaning towards what Mark said about including this last chart, which is 3, that could come in after we've gone through the whole exercise and said, all right, here presenting, here is how we stand by doing the merit score. This is the analysis. If we had added this to certain bridges, this is what the impact would be, the effect.
And that could certainly be our discussion down the road.
It has to be
So that's
after,
good.
so yeah, we get to that
For the
point.
purposes of this meeting then, would you be looking at, and this might be reiterating what Mark said, adoption of option 1 with the contingency that on bridges, this chart is provided in the comment.
As a comparison after that first
As
go
an
round with the
appendix or
marriage.
as
Yeah.
a supplement.
During
Yeah.
the program.
Second, whatever Andrew.
Whatever Andrew says.
Ready to go.
That's-
Let's-
So we're really looking at option 1.
Don't do the discussion all over again.
Merit score with option, group merit score with option
Well,
1.
I'm confused as to what, I mean, you understand exactly what Andrew's saying here.
Yes.
And we have a motion, we have a second, so it's the discussion on your motion that we're
Okay.
having, so
Right.
Yeah. we
I
can-
guess,
So the-
Robert's rules, I don't know where we're at, it's a
So
friendly
amended
amendment
motion
to
to
you.
approve the language in option 1, with the option to include the table in option 3 as a
Post-evaluation.
post-evaluation consideration.
Well, not an option,
Supplemental info.
a requirement
No, it says
to
Yeah,
include
that's-
option 3
Yeah.
as supplemental information in an appendix.
There you go.
Got it.
We good, we got, so that's a new motion.
No, it's an
Second
amendment.
that.
Resecond motion,
I'll second
amendment second.
Karen, do you have that motion?
We are approving the language in option 1 with requirement to include option 3 as supplemental information in an appendix.
Excellent.
That
So
says it.
we have
Excellent.
that, we have a motion, we have a second.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Roll call? No roll call. Everybody in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstain? Motion carries.
Thank you. I know that was a tedious discussion, but part of our goal here is to ensure that you guys have a thorough understanding of how we build this tip and the components to it. So, it's worthwhile to go through this every once in a while so you have the context moving forward. So thank you for that.
Item 8, right? Is that where we're at? Nice, not safety.
Well, we got some other
No,
stuff to
Oh.
deal with.
Oh, boy.
Sorry.
All right.
All right, so we're gonna come back to, I know it's a long one, I'm sorry, guys.
Get chastised by Steve.
All right, so, approve the merit score sheet, the tip application, we wanted to get your approval on the use of the JOT form. If anybody, we didn't hear any questions or comments about what we shared with the planning committee members. If there are none, we just need a motion to
I'll
approve
move
use
for
of the
adopt
JOT.
that as it is.
All right, moved by Mike.
I love it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Great.
All right.
And then final thing is, we'll try to be as brief as we can. I know it's getting late. We have not kind of finalized this preservation discussion paper. I think that in the interest of time, unless, the department has any further information at this point, this paper relates to how we're going to categorize projects, assuming that we're still continuing with the preservation first language that was in the 2019 tip guidance materials. And what this does, and this why this is important, we need your approval, is it will limit to some degree the elements on projects related to preservation when you're doing sidewalk work. So if you're doing a pavement project that's a preservation and you're proposing sidewalk work, you're gonna be limited to about half a mile of replacement of sidewalk. If you have more than that, then you move into a beyond preservation category, right? Because you're building new sidewalk or reconstructing.
It's a
Another
half mile of
definition.
replacement.
Correct.
Nothing
Correct. And new
Contiguous?
as well.
Contiguous,
Oh, half
continuous?
mile of,
New and, new and.
Or
and
segment.
that can be preservation.
Total.
That can be.
So that can be
Oh, yeah.
preservation.
What was that again?
A half mile of new sidewalk or a half mile of replacement.
Can be
It
preservation.
can be a preservation project.
Yeah, it's like a
Okay, so you can,
You can add sidewalk,
but not more than that.
but not more than
Correct,
that.
okay.
You know, several times during the last update, we had discussions of, are we comparing apples to apples in terms of what a preservation project was, or did it fall in, depending on the scope, beyond preservation? So at least if we define something before we start getting project specific, it makes sense that sort of that half mile of sidewalk can still be called a preservation project.
All right. Is there action
We
required?
do need
on that?
action on this concept paper, and this will guide how we categorize projects pending release of the tip-stip guidance and any other changes that might come with the infrastructure bill and any other uncertainties that are out there.
So we're looking for a motion to approve this concept paper.
I'll make a motion to approve the concept paper.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Michael, second. Eric, any further discussion?
No, on that about.
Word second wasn't even on your mouth. You got it.
So that was a second, right?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion?
Can I go
Yeah.
back to, wasn't that contingency part of the TAP application, wasn't that half mile, was there?
No.
Renewed, I don't know, just something struck me, the half mile sidewalk about, but that's why I asked the question. Can you, it can be total within a project, a half mile total sidewalk?
Right.
And doesn't that to be a half mile contiguous pieces?
Doesn't have to be contiguous.
Unless you want to change the language to be like that, we're not intending.
No,
This is
I just
not
wanted
trying to.
clarification, that's all I.
But we're not trying to, microanalyze this here. We just, is somebody doing a
Some
preservation
parameter.
job, or is somebody doing a much bigger scope of a project?
a
So
big,
don't come in every project, 4.9 feet of, file side.
Gotcha. All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion, Michael?
No.
Then all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries.
Okay,
Now where are we going?
final thing on the tip, Andrew, do you want to walk through this very, very quickly?
Sure. Chris Howard and Jacob and I developed new project fact sheets, and if you scroll down or flip forward in your packet, and project summary tables as well. We based these on the old ones used in the prior tip cycle. The main change is on the back end. These are automatically generated through a Microsoft Access report, which streamlines the process for us, makes it a lot easier for us to give you all these materials when the project applications come in. If you have any comments on the format, or if you'd like to see any more information, reach out to myself or Jacob or Chris. We'll be happy to try to accommodate that on the Access report.
Are you looking?
We don't need action on that. That was just something that we're sharing with you folks so that if you, so you're gonna see some new materials from us. And I believe with that, that is it with the tip. Thank you for your patience on that. That was, it's really gonna help us to move forward, with the tip update. We do have a draft schedule, that we don't need to approve today. Our goal though is we'll share it with the policy board in September. And ultimately, we hope to be able to issue a solicitation in the month of September. So stay tuned on that. If it all goes well, we should be able, and here's the draft on the board here. We would be issuing the solicitation around September 10th with a deadline of October 22nd. And then we'll start the evaluation process thereafter. And as we have typically done here in CDTC, we'll get into the evaluation, the project selection, project programming stage, January and February of 2022.
So a September solicitation with an October deadline to submit?
That would be our ideal.
That's awfully quick, isn't it?
It's optimistic. That's why this is subject to change, because obviously there's some unknowns here. We drafted this schedule in hopes that things would go quickly, but we do have an alternative schedule where we issue the solicitation after the October planning committee meeting.
It's just a short turnaround for.
Right, it's short, it shrinks the application time period and it shrinks our review time. It will not shrink the period of time we have allocated for programming steps.
I'm just saying for locals to respond.
Yes.
It's not a lot of time.
It's
Unless
not
there's
a
something
time.
that they had in the books
I
already.
mean, that's a hard, that's
It's
tough,
6
right?
weeks. It's 6 weeks.
I mean, that's tough, especially for
Well, the
Smaller
big thing is they need
municipalities.
to solicit consultants now to assist with the prep if they're gonna use outside work. That's gonna be key for them
Yeah.
with that time frame.
We can adjust that if that is too short.
I'm just mentioning it, that seems like a quick turnaround but maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can extend out the deadline. Like I said, the way this is drafted, it would give you folks 6 weeks. If you need 8 weeks, we can push it to mid-November.
I'm looking around, I mean, Ross puts tips together.
Well, I mean, there are contingencies that were previously discussed that we're looking at federal funding potentials that could skew that, so.
But I'm thinking within, say, county office or municipal offices, not many of us sitting around here right now are the ones putting the tip application and stuff together.
You get budget implications and everything's at 20% back. It's just it's a hard thing.
I know, but the thing I'm thinking is, well, we're gonna turn around, leave here and talk to people and say, well, when you get it, you get 6 weeks to do it.
For context, you all, I think, had 5 weeks last time.
Okay.
Yeah, but we came away with all gray hair.
I'm sure you did. It's still tight. I mean, admittedly, this is tight. I mean, since I have been working at CDTC, we used to start the tip update over this past summer, and then work through the process. But things have really squeezed over the years for a number of reasons that are beyond the control of all of us in this room. So we're doing the best we can, and I know it's hard on everybody.
We did this summer once before. Remember, we went to the airport and had a meeting because there was a thunderstorm and knocked us out of here.
Right.
That was a tip meeting.
And you can start now with the old merit score sheet.
Yeah.
Is it tied to just the fact that we have to meet the first Wednesday of every month? Like, to give it the 2 more weeks, so they have 8 weeks, just then we don't meet the first Wednesday, but we meet the.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, yeah, we considered that, we considered how much staff time we're gonna need to evaluate everything. I mean, you folks don't see what goes on in this office when we have 3 weeks to evaluate all these projects.
Yeah, but that's
So,
what they're gonna tell us.
remember I used to have non-gray hair too, right? So.
No, but that's the answer that they're gonna tell us.
Yeah.
So what are you looking for the committee to do today?
So today, nothing. We're gonna evaluate this. We're showing this more for your information. I think we'll bring it to policy board. I guess we probably do need a motion for you folks to give it to the policy board to make the final.
This
the
schedule
to issue
with the
schedule.
possibility of giving locals
More
a
time.
little more time?
Yeah.
Is that
Everybody,
everybody?
DOT too.
If we can.
Yeah.
So you're looking for a motion to approve this schedule? I don't know, on a condition on it, but just
Well,
the understanding that you're
If the
gonna take
committee prefers us to add two weeks to the submission deadline to give you guys a total of 8 weeks, we can do that right now. If that's the committee's.
We got 5 last time, but now it's technically 3 more.
Yeah.
I'll motion for that.
So we have a motion from Andrew to add the additional 2 weeks of credit.
Additional 2 weeks.
You pushed everything else out too, right?
Yeah, we'll adjust this and we'll share a final version with the policy board.
So
But
that's a motion to approve the schedule from Andrew with the additional 2 weeks of review time, and I have a second from Ross.
Okay.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Okay. All right.
Wow.
Let's rifle through the rest of this agenda. We'll probably table some of the discussion items, but we'll get through the remainder of the action items.
So where are we now, Sandy? Let's see.
We are on the safety performance measures, so that would be DOT.
Yeah, I mean, this really isn't our regional data. This stuff comes out of main office and they provide all these to the various MPOs and put a conservative projection for crash reduction out there with numbers that we can hopefully hit with the improvements we make. So there certainly is the ability to modify these or have our own performance measures, but all the MPOs around the state buy into these numbers, and that's really about it.
All right, so is this an action item?
This is an action item. We have to approve these to be incorporated in our long-range
The
plan.
safety targets?
Yep.
All right. Any,
The 1%.
I have a motion to approve these targets. Second was. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Motion
Opposed?
going fast.
Okay.
Can I put in for a pay raise?
You too. I just started. and
Moved.
then- Okay, and finally, this will be quick as well. There's a, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of you.
That's quite all
Apologize.
right. Jump, feel free to jump. I'm a little slow today.
We did
Sleep
have one
deprived.
technical assistance project application from, which,
Multi-municipality.
yes. It is a joint effort between Saratoga County, City of Saratoga Springs, and the town of Wilton, to look at sort of a trail pedestrian network feasibility effort. Sort of, I'll call it a sketch level of detail. Do some analysis, partnering with CDRPC on existing conditions. It should have been in your packet. Is it not in your packet?
Is this an additional item? Did we already approve this?
No,
This is one sheet.
Technical assistance program?
Yeah, it's that.
Okay.
Item 9
Nine, well, was that said 8 on here, but it's actually item 9 on the agenda.
should be in your packet.
All right.
It says agenda number 8 on the top right corner, one page.
I'm not seeing it in yours.
It's okay.
Okay,
That's
so
all
I
right.
apologize. Maybe the
Whoa,
printed copy didn't have it.
That's all right. Anybody
Um,
want to explain this one? Or?
Sandy got it. What
That was the explanation. It's a pretty straightforward project. It's gonna include some mapping. It's gonna be focused on the corridor, so the scope of work is gonna be narrowed to that area. It's gonna be a municipal project with all the appropriate municipalities partnering on it. So it's a slam dunk.
See, I could add a lot, but I don't dare to at this point in the day.
Slam dunk.
Exactly.
So you need a.
We do need a motion to approve that project.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Thank you, Adam. Further discussion?
Great.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstained? All right.
Thanks, everybody.
It's moved. 9. So discussion items, is that what we're moving into?
Yeah.
CDTC project delivery. We
Jacob, what you got for us today on that?
So just quickly, a few updates from the past month that I've gotten from consultants. We have City's Schenectady project, Broadway pavement preservation. Letting was held in June. Schenectady County project, Notch Street and Balltown Road intersection. Letting was also held in June. And County Clifton Park, Bull Road multi-use path design approval was going to be back in July. For next month, I'm going to be reaching out to the City of Schenectady, Rensselaer County, and the town of Nassau for their TIP project updates. I had Andrew set to present on 9/20. Do you want to have our go through with it, or?
In the interest of time would be, why don't we table that? And I'm sorry, Adam, but we'll do it again in a future meeting.
Going to construction in September. That's the update.
Great. I love it. Thank you.
And that's all I've got.
Okay.
Thank you, Jacob. Nice dot delivery schedule. Are we,
No changes.
all good? We're all green?
All green.
All green. All green. All right. Status of CDTC plan.
Obviously, the linkage and assorted other regional planning studies chart is in your packet. I won't go through it. Obviously, with my taking on the executive director role, we're gonna be reorganizing in here. So bear with us while we go through this transition. If you have any questions or comments about anything, any concerns, feel free to reach out to me at any time and I'll leave it there.
Okay, status of planning activities. Are we going to continue with that? CDRPC, do we want to go through this quickly?
All right, the scoring awards for intermunicipal cooperation are open. Do you have any good projects that include intermunicipal cooperation and/or cooperation between municipalities and nonprofit organizations? Check our website for information and please apply. We have 0 applications at this point, so your chances of being recognized are very high.
Thank you.
Go
Go ahead.
We're applying for a $500,000 EDA grant for regional challenge that would then lead to between $25 and $100 million as part of recovery funding for a variety of projects. We're going to report on that later on. Ross?
So exciting news that we can now make public. So we are expanding our universal access program to the state workforce. That's going to start with a set group of state workers that park in peripheral parking ride lots. We're handing out the passes this week, and with the state workforce coming back, not wood because that may change very soon. But actually starting in about 2 weeks, we're going to start providing services to the lots that these individuals park at. It's an access program, but they get universal access. That's where the employees can ride for free. And so because of that, they're parking in the lots. We then bring service to those lots. It's something we've been working on with OGS for many, many years. And we're excited to start it. And, the hopes are that expands incrementally to eventually, obviously it's going to be years from now, but eventually where all state workers can ride CDTA services for free. So the first step towards that goal is starting the next few weeks.
Thank you, Ross. Nice dot. There we guys.
I think we can do STIP is the only important topic.
If you had handed those around.
Yeah, so there's a first handout coming around, which represents the current federal fiscal year on the STIP.
Yeah.
And then there's a second handout with the year 2022 on top of it. I guess I'll hand both out now. For federal 21, this is related to the good old STIP performance discussion. Yeah, that went around already.
This one around, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys get?
Yeah, they got both. I think I said both now. So federal 21, there's 9 projects here that are still indicating they're going to go to construction this year prior to September. If they are not going to make it to construction by September, i.e. a PS&E approved by Lorenzo, we need to, please work with us and Glenn to move it to the respective federal fiscal year that it will be let in. If it's next year, great. If it's not next year, put it into 23. So that's the current federal fiscal year picture. And I've tried to put a little note at the top of, projects in this list that will not be obligated need to be moved. And then the federal 22 is the second handout, which is the 2-sided page. There's 25 projects here that are currently showing construction in federal 22. This is the unamended STIP performance part of the discussion, where if you feel there's a smidge of a chance of not delivering your project in federal 22, please move it to federal 23.
Before September.
Before September of this year. So if your project's in 22 and you haven't started yet, I would highly recommend you move it to 23. And then if you do accelerate your delivery, we can bring it back.
Are you looking at doing, I don't mean this in the wrong, but a forced move like we did before?
Encouraged. I'll call it encouraged. We're going to
A couple weeks from now, maybe.
Yeah, if no one's moving, we're gonna, there's 25 projects shown, and that is not likely that all 25 would make it over the plate, so.
So you may come back with a sheet bulleted in some manner or color or something like that, saying.
I mean, we don't want to dictate this. I said this is the STIP performance is reflective of the body. It's not the DOT sort of thing here. So I mean, we don't mind doing the legwork to move some of these out or the encouragement, but it's still a sponsor's decision to
But here,
move or not.
you're making that point here with so few around the table. So I don't know.
We're in the World Wide Web, or we're.
How is this communicated to, is there a role that we can assist you folks with in just communicating to the local sponsors of these projects, what you're looking for?
That would help if.
Can you do a 1-paragraph request that Sandy can just send out?
Yeah, between us and Lorenzo, we can, Lorenzo does help with this, but do want to have CDT help with this as well. And, that we can go to the people on the list and say, please move or don't move your project, but at least look at it. Now is the time to.
Okay. And that's something that one of my goals as executive director now is I feel like we need to do a better job of communicating to our local government members, particularly those with active TIP projects, on some of these details that unless you're in this room, you might not be getting the full context of. So we're going to try to increase the communication with sponsors. So we're looking for that.
And sometimes if you're scheduled for a wedding in September of this year, it's just pushing it back to after October and you're already in the next fiscal year. So I think that's what we did last time was those projects.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, New York State Thruway Authority, do we have anybody?
Actually, the next three folks, we don't have
No.
anybody.
Local planning activities. Anybody want to report on anything? No, not seeing. I guess we would just note upcoming meetings, August 10th, Bike Ped, August 18th, Freight Advisory, and September 2nd.
So moved.
Move to adjourn, is that a
Figured that
move
was
to
the next
adjourn,
one.
Mike? Do I have a second to that? Second, okay, all in favor, aye? All right.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Good job.
Good job.
Yes.
Sorry that